everything went fine. So we saw the base fee react as we thought, and also the transaction pools being relatively stable. So I think there are no big issues there.
Yeah, it's just the same for me. It was fine.
Yeah, sure. So one of the weaknesses that we found after a fork is that a few hundred transactions got queued up, and transactions were still executing, but there was about 700 which were, so to say, executable, but miners kept rejecting it. But we looked into the whole thing, and essentially what was happening is that when you, so get has this miner configuration parameter called the gas price. You just set the minimum price that you're willing to accept, which miners own. Every single miner on the Net had set it to 1 gigabyte. And this flag is also interpreted post-London as the minimum tip that a miner is willing to accept transactions with. So the moment we switched over to London, it became that instead of a 1 gigabyte transaction, we want a 1 gigabyte tip plus whatever the base fee is. Now, of course, since post-London, the base fee immediately jumped up. It meant that none of the transactions were actually executable anymore, but they were nonetheless still in the transaction pool and they were just lingering there. So essentially, I just reduced one of the miners' gas price limit by 20 Wei, and that solved the whole thing. And essentially, the reason there were 700 transactions was because I think 400 of them was the faucet, and probably a few more accounts that happened to block up the queue. I mean, the first transaction was non-executable, so obviously everything else just blocked up the queue. So yeah, that's kind of what we saw. On mainnet, I don't think this will be relevant because in general, it's not that transactions don't really reach the limits that miners set. Rather, there are always more expensive transactions. The pool is always full, and the more expensive transactions always push out the cheaper ones. So I don't think this can happen on mainnet, and even if it would happen, it would sort itself out because the more expensive transactions would just evict the cheaper ones. So even if temporarily it would happen, but I don't think it would happen. I haven't investigated a possible fix for this specifically because I don't think it's really an issue. It's more like this weird transition. I mean, it happens once per the lifetime of the chain, so it's not that big of a deal. But probably before London, we will investigate it a tiny bit closer just to make sure that it's fine.
Got it. Thanks. Sorry, this was my bad. I had us muted on the stream for the first Gordy part. So just a quick recap. When we had the Gordy fork or the London fork on Gordy, the Geth and Basu team ran a spammer and everything was fine. There was a small issue that we found on Rinkeby, which Peter was just explaining with regards to the minimum price that a miner will accept for a transaction. And that was fixed by just changing the miner config. So sorry for the people who missed kind of the first part of that. Cool. So yeah, with the 3 testnets basically having forked successfully, we also set a block for mainnet this week. So we did this async, but just to document it and make sure it's clear. The block is 12,965,000 on mainnet. Yeah, and I think most clients have already either merged that or have a PR open for it. It should happen on August 4th, roughly, and we'll obviously know better the exact date once we get closer to the actual fork time. And I think the last kind of open issue with regards to London was what do we do with regards to the effective gas price field in the transaction receipts? Light client, you'd opened an issue for that on the ETH1 specs, which I saw you kind of updated yesterday. Yeah, do you want to maybe just give a quick update of like what the issue is and what you've kind of figured out yesterday?
Sure. Yeah, I made a mistake. When I was talking to the Open Ethereum team, they were asking about the spec and wondering how if this effective gas price value should be returned pre-London transactions in the receipt. And I just quickly looked at the Geth code and I completely like misread it, and it was thinking that Geth also did not return the effective gas price, and so it seemed like there was an issue with the clients implementing the spec. But then I saw it again yesterday and I realized that I had made a mistake. But that still leaves the question, like, do clients prefer to follow the spec? Because Open Ethereum seemed to signal that they would rather not provide effective gas price before London for transactions before London. I am like minorly against that, but that's what the issue is about. So if anyone has thoughts or preferences, that's curious to hear.
I have a counter worry. So I think the spec also states that after London, the gas price field of the transaction should be dropped, at least for 1559 transactions. And currently what Geth does is that after a transaction is mined, the gas price field in the not in the receipt, but the gas price field in the transaction when you retrieve a transaction from the RPC, it is set to the actual gas price paid. So if you dig up any past transaction, the gas price will be the amount that the user paid for it. And so essentially it's exactly the same thing as the effective gas price spec, but part of the transaction. And I don't think it's a good idea to drop this field just now, because that is what everybody is relying on. So we could say that the field is deprecated and maybe drop it in the future, but I think it's a bit of a bold move to just nuke it out immediately when the fork hits and switch it over to different location.
Should we have both gas price be the effective gas price that's in the transaction object, and then effective gas price as an element of the receipt?
So that is what Geth does.
What do other teams do right now?
I'm not sure. I originally implemented it to transaction object not to contain gas price for the 5059 transaction, but I'm aware that this discussion was mentioned a few weeks ago, and not really sure about the current implementation. I need to check.
Yeah, I believe we have effective gas price in the receipt and no gas price in the transaction object. I can check though.
I think we do the same like Bezel and Open Ethereum, but on the other hand, I think it is a good idea to return effective gas price. So maybe we will do that.
So is there an argument against basically doing both? And if we go ahead with both, is that it seems like it's a pretty simple thing to add, basically keep the gas price in the transactions and keep the effective gas price in the receipt. Like, is there any reason against doing both those things?
So the only catch with keeping gas price in the transaction is that before a 1559 transaction is executed, the gas price you cannot calculate it because it's obviously depends on the base fee. So currently GET sets it to the fee cap, meaning that that's the maximum that you would pay. And once the transaction is mined, it is updated to the amount you actually paid. And we kind of felt that this is something that, so user experience wise, this is what kind of makes sense. But it's I think it's important to realize that there's this work.
Yeah, it's not just setting the value. Yeah.
So we tend to always want to, it seems like we always want to overload these fields. Why don't we want to just not have the gas price for the 1559 transaction? And if you're curious about the effective gas price, just ask for the receipt.
Because all the infrastructure that is in place currently in Ethereum has only a single place to retrieve the gas price from, and that's the transaction object dot gas price. So it means that post fork, every single software that ever touches an Ethereum transaction needs to be changed, and that's
I see.
requirement in my opinion. So that's why we are suggesting to keep it around at least as a deprecation thing and remove it, I don't know, in a few months.
So I guess the other kind of concern here is this is like a non-consensus change, and if we set a fork block for mainnet, we probably want to have releases from clients, out ideally next week with kind of, that are London compatible, so that people can start upgrading across the ecosystem, because there's only going to be roughly like 3 weeks. I guess how important that people feel that this is like harmonized before the like official London releases are out. Yeah, because do we want to just agree to kind of do both? Have the effective gas price in pre-London transactions, and also have the gas price field, return the effective gas price. Yeah. Or maybe, I guess, a better question is like, how much delay does it add to client teams to do both, right? Is it like a day that's needed, or does it push things back by a week? And if it pushes things back by a week, I think I would have a week preference for us, not necessarily harmonizing this before the fork, and maybe clients will just need to like document a bit better how they handle those two things.
For us, I think it is like a day, not a week.
Oh, sorry, we can't hear you very well, Marek. You kind of sound like a robot.
Sorry. So for us, it is like a day to fix it. So.
Okay.
I think it would be good to converge and do those things, and it wouldn't be difficult to do. But I also kind of like Peter's suggestion of potentially signaling that this will go away. Yeah, just because of the overloading semantics of the gas price and the transaction object.
I assume that's something we can just add as a comment in the JSON RPC spec.
Yeah, I'll update the spec right now. I think it's really good to try and converge, if at all possible, before the fork. I think that's something that would be really good just to keep in mind as we go forward. The easier it is for people to just swap clients in and out, I think is better for the ecosystem.
Yeah.
The more specific behavior RPCs have, I think, get to a dangerous place.
So oh, go ahead.
One other question is, and this is something that I don't have enough experience with, is how often does it happen that somebody, or how often do we expect it to happen that somebody is curious about the gas price paid without caring about other fields in the receipt? Because so if we put this, so essentially the effective gas price can be calculated without the receipt. So every other field is completely useless because I only need the fee cap, the priority fee, and the base fee, and I can just calculate it. Now, if we put it in the receipt, then you just need to dig up the receipt and send it to the user, even if they are only interested in how the final gas price was. The question is this a problem or not?
I feel like we had discussed on Discord like why it ended up in the receipt, but I forget why. Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, it's a better place. I can accept that. I am talking about the practicalities.
I don't think I quite followed what your argument was. Like, are you saying people might only want the effective gas price, so why download the whole receipt? Or are you saying the inverse or something different?
Yeah, so essentially what I'm saying is that if I only care about the gas price, then I still need to dig up the receipt from the database just to calculate the gas price, which doesn't need any of the receipt fields. But the question is, does it happen often that somebody would be interested in the gas price but not the status of the execution, or does it ever happen? And this is something I cannot respond.
That's a good question. I also don't know.
I assume it's like a common use case, right? Like you imagine you go on Etherscan, it's like something you want to see in your transaction, but then they also show you everything else, right? Or like, I don't know, MetaMask showing you like the amount you paid. You actually don't see it. So like if, I don't know, I'm looking right now at MetaMask, you actually, you see when you click on one of your transactions, you see the gas price that you've paid. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess
Yeah.
any such wallet or something will also show if the transaction failed or not, and there you kind of need the receipt. So
Okay.
maybe.
Yeah. If you need the receipt to show whether a transaction has failed, it feels like there's not a lot of use cases where you want to show the price paid but not the success status, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was also thinking about now.
Yeah. And like you said, right, you can actually recalculate the effective gas price from the information in the transaction object itself. So I think if a wallet wanted to do that optimization, they could also like calculate it, right?
Yeah, of course. So it was just a question. So I can also see that probably it is fine because you care if you care about the effective gas price, you also care whether the transaction succeeded or failed.
So I guess, yeah, given that, we can probably go with that. Obviously, if somebody feels very strongly in the future, otherwise they can like make an EAP to change it. And if we announce that this field is being deprecated, I don't know, before like the next hard fork or something, somebody can also kind of step up and say like, don't deprecate this, it breaks my app for these very specific reasons. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. So I think, yeah, just to summarize then, we'll go with having the gas price field in 1559 style transactions, which will return basically the effective gas price. We also agree to have the effective gas price in pre-EIP 1559 blocks. And like Lance said, he'll add a deprecation notice to the gas price field in the 1559 transaction format in the JSON RPC spec so that people are aware that this is happening.
And also that the gas price field should return fee cap if the transaction is unmet.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's right. So it's basically fee cap prior to be in mind, yeah.
So just to clarify that even after this field is obviously deprecated and removed in the future, that would mean it's deprecated and removed for 1559 transactions, but for legacy transactions, we are still keeping it forever, so to say.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Okay. And I guess kind of the next point on the agenda was like the client releases for London. Do teams feel like they can get a release out like early next week, given those changes? Is that still realistic?
We already released with the mainnet block.
But I assume you'll want me to take another release, right? Like basically the reason I'm asking is if there's a Ethereum.org blog post that says download this release for Besu, you probably want the one with that transaction fix, right?
Yeah, of course. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, is that realistic to get like early next week?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do an out-of-band release.
Okay. Yeah. So if any client team feels they cannot have a release early next week, now's kind of the time to speak up. Basically.
Is it Monday, early next week, or Tuesday?
Monday or Tuesday, ideally. And the reason I'm asking is, if it's Monday or Tuesday, then we can have the blog post go out like Wednesday Europe, and that's like that's basically 3 weeks before the upgrade. So it feels like it's enough time. But if we have to wait, if the releases only come out like Thursday or Friday, then the blog post probably won't go up until like the week after that, and that's only 2 weeks before the upgrade. So yeah, Monday or Tuesday would be ideal.
Okay, I think it's realistic for Open Ethereum, although we don't have still fee history implemented completely, but I think it will be.
Yeah, but the fee history, there's not consensus, so yeah. I guess that's okay.
Oh yeah, but it's the same question as the previous one, that ideally you want all clients to behave the same, otherwise you cannot really just swap it out and they do weird shit.
Yeah.
I think it's not consensus critical, but it would be super nice to have them work the same way.
Cool. Okay, so it seems like there's no major objections. So yeah, if teams can have a release out early next week with those changes, then I think we'll be all set for London. One, I guess, related thing is I just want to make sure this is said on the call. So with London happening and 1559 in it, the miners will have to target a block size that's twice as big as what they're currently targeting pre-London. So if, say, they're targeting 15 million, they're going to have to bump that target to 30 million. The three mainnet compatible mainnet clients all have a JSON RPC call to do that. I've linked them all in the agenda for the call, but Get has added miner set gas limit. Open Ethereum has parity_set gas seal target. And Besu has miner change target gas limit. So just if you're running a miner, it's really important that you basically need to call that and double the gas target that you're aiming for. Otherwise, after the fork, you're going to start reducing the blocks and just including less transactions into them. So yeah, the links are in the agenda. I think Get doesn't have a doc link yet, but it's merging the code. And the last thing, so I think, this came up. Trent, you maybe want to talk about it, but as you were reaching out to like the ecosystem about London readiness, there's a bunch of questions that came up about some non-consensus behavior for clients. And that it would be good to kind of clarify how different clients handle stuff. Do you want to kind of give some quick background on that and ask the questions that you've been asked?
Yeah, just a short summary of it. I think the two main things were how the different clients handle transaction pool sorting, as well as the other one escapes me. But that was a big one because that's right. The percent that's required to replace a transaction, or the percent bump. So if the clients can just like mention what or go over what they've done for each of those, that'd be good. Just have a record of it, so we can see what the differences are.
So from Get's perspective, we kind of, as far as I know, our attempt was to keep the existing behavior, namely that transactions in the pool are sorted by the gas tip, so the amount of money that goes to the miner, because kind of that's the important thing. So when you start including transactions, the miner isn't really interested in how much is burned, rather how much do they get. And as far as I know, the replacement logic is similar to previously. You need to bump by 10% the tip itself. I mean, the stuff that the miner gets, that needs to be bumped by 10% to do a replacement.
I think we do the same.
We are doing the same too.
Just double check, is it really that it's only the tip? Because I think we like it went back and forth a couple times in the past, but I think at least like the last version in the code that I saw required a bump of both the tip and the PCAP. So just wanted to confirm with whoever in Geth has seen the latest implementation there.
So just on our end, I think we check against the current base fee. So it's essentially a 10% bump in the expected effective gas price. Yeah.
I see, that makes sense. But yeah, basically the point is just that if the fee cap is below the current base fee, then like a bump in the tip is basically free because you don't actually end up paying that. And so just like a naive bump of only the tip, I think has some undesirable behaviors replacement. But I would recommend wallets and everything to usually just have the default behavior, like the 10% bump in both fee cap and tip where it makes sense. But like at least there you're on the safe side that you will kind of achieve replacement.
Open Ethereum does sorting and replacement based on the effective gas price. And if you want to replace a transaction, we don't care if you bump the max fee per gas or max priority fee per gas. You just need the calculated effective gas price based on that increased values to be bumped by 12%. So again, based on the effective gas price.
Okay, but a question there. I mean, transactions can only be replaced if they're pending in Mempool. Transactions be above the current includability, like above the current base fee, will always just be included immediately. I mean, unless we have extreme congestions and all blocks are 2x. But like usually, so basically we're only talking about transactions that are not includable right now anyway. So all of them will have an effective tip of 0. So I'm just curious, how do you bump an effective tip of 0?
I don't think you mentioned the effective tip. You said effective gas price, so the stuff that gets paid at the end, didn't you?
Sorry, what was you said? When you say tip, you also mean like the effective tip, right? Like what's paid. You kind of broke up there, Peter.
Never mind. I was just trying to clarify, but it's just getting more complicated anymore. Lost in the details.
So I guess it seems like at a high level, every client team sorts the transaction pool by basically the effective tip or what goes to the miner, and requires a bump of the effective tip by at least 10%, and 12% for Open Ethereum. Is that right?
So I kind of got. I wasn't entirely sure who said it, but I kind of got a bit unsure about it because maybe Geth also does it That's the effective
Got it.
effective price. Sean, are you here by any chance?
Yes, I'm here.
Do you remember how do we implement the eviction? Does it take into account only the gas paid to the miner or the global effective gas tip when you try to figure out whether something is underpriced or not?
Oh, I don't quite understand the question. The eviction rule, yeah. Well, yeah, we have this minimum for the effective tip, like this global minimum, and well, we have the dual priority queues. But what are you asking about right now?
When you send a transaction that already exists, I mean, the account nouns already exist, then previously we had a 10% bump. You need to bump up the fee to.
Yeah, oh, the bump rule, yeah. So right now the price, the replacement rule is like you have to increase both the you have to increase the parameters specified in the transaction by 10%. So like the max fee per gas and max priority fee per gas parameters, they both have to increase at least 10%. Then you can replace the transaction. So the current effective tip doesn't matter here, I think.
Yeah. So and also just to say, I think at least that piece of the transaction pool might just be kind of the unchanged version that I implemented, and like if that is the case, then indeed it Geth requires the 10% bump in both fields.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, Trent, does that help?
Yeah, I think that was good to go over.
Great. And it's also worth noting, Aragon is working on a different transaction pool design. I think Alexei has shared the write-up about it before. I'm not sure how final it is. I don't know. Artem, do you have any comments on that? I'm not sure if you've been involved in that at all.
Oh yeah, I haven't been like very involved in it. Like we are still writing it. I think we just finished the design of it. I think we will have it ready by the London mainnet rollout. But yeah, I guess it's better to ask offline.
Okay. I just shared the link, to the wiki page in the chat here if anyone wants to have a look. Oh, and Ansgar, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe one last comment on like the transaction pool topic as a whole. I just wanted to briefly point out that I think like right now the individual clients do have slightly different like sorting eviction logic. So basically I think I don't think that's a problem, but just like because right before 1559, because it was one dimensional, like basically everyone had the same rule, and so like behavior was identical. I mean, up to of course the size of the transaction pool. And now this will no longer be the case. I think that won't be an issue, because that just means that like slightly different transactions will be retained with that slightly different clients. That actually kind of increases the global size of the mempool even. But it's something to just like keep in mind and at least potentially watch for and see if that kind of creates any issues going forward. I don't expect to, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like we'll be able to see on mainnet, I guess, if there's some client that just has much less of transactions or is like less efficient at relaying them. Cool. That's all we had for London, unless anybody else had anything they wanted to bring up.
I actually just wanted to mention that I did check the code just now, and whether this is correct or not is up for debate. But Geth currently requires either the gas fee or the tip to go up 10%.
Are you sure? It should require both to be bumped. I'm pretty sure about that. That's the correct behavior.
Yes, that's why I'm saying that it doesn't do the correct.
So if we have incorrect code on master,
Yes, I just. Anyway, I'll post here a link and we can continue just for the reference since I mentioned it. And let's just switch.
I think actually it looks like, I'm looking at it right now on the master, but it looks like only the comment is incorrect, not the code itself. But yeah, we sure that should be offline. Yeah.
Oh, indeed, because it rejects it if.
Yeah, if either is not met, it rejects it. So it looks like it's only the
Let's do
comment.
the Geth pair programming later.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess, yeah, get team, I should probably just triple check that is correct.
Yeah, exactly. Let's just go forward with the other topics.
Yeah, and yeah, next Alcor devs, we can have the Geth pair programming session. Cool. Anything else on London? Okay, so I guess, yeah, next up, Mikael put together a merge readiness checklist. So basically trying to go over all the stuff that needs to happen on both the consensus and execution side, so that we have like a high level kind of list of things to do. I think it probably makes sense for you, Mikael, to like maybe share it and go over the high level kind of details of it. It's something I think is going to be really helpful in then figuring out, do we think we can, when do we think we can do the merge? What do we think are the biggest problems or like open issues in that list that are going to require more attention? And also, is anything missing from this list that's important?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Before we go briefly through this list, I just want to mention that thanks a lot, Danny, for compiling it. Actually, so yeah, it's not final, obviously, because there is an ongoing R&D and will be ongoing or already going implementation work. So we'll keep this list updated. And as you mentioned, it might not be full. So just want to encourage everyone here to take your time to go through this list and think. If you find anything that is missed in this list and you think that is important, reach us out and let's discuss. So yeah, let's go briefly through the list, then get back to discussion.
Also, just want to mention it's the granularity of like a publicly shared list. Obviously, there's a lot of detail we could drill into, but that's just kind of not the purpose here.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Danny. Okay, so yeah. I can share the screen actually. I can do this. Yeah.
If you want to share your screen, I'm not sure that people on YouTube will be able to see, but the list has been posted in the chat, and I'll make sure to post it in the comments as well.
Right. Okay, so do you see my screen?
Oh yeah, we do see it, and on YouTube as well.
Okay, cool. Okay, so the first section here is the consensus layer. So consensus layer specs are feature complete. And the next step is to rebase the spec with London and Altair. Also, there will be some insignificant fixes on the other parts of the spec, which is networking and API stuff. So the next part is the execution layer. What do we have on the execution layer specs right now is the high-level design doc that has been like published a while ago, and the Ryanism spec published after it, but it's been long time ago, like a couple of months, I guess. So the next step and what is the priority now is to actually write a specification for the execution layer, which will consist, I guess, from a couple of EIPs on the consensus side, on the core protocol side, and also we need to the specifications for the state and block sync. Also, there is the change in the JSON RPC. They should not be significant. A couple of endpoints will be deprecated that are related to mining process, and probably one or two will be added, like the get most recent finalized block. And the consensus API is also major thing to figure out. We have the JSON RPC specification and implementations of it. But it doesn't seem like it's perfect for the production. This is what has been discussed recently, and I think we should reiterate on it and come to conclusion. How do we want to implement consensus API? What will be the underlying communication protocol and so forth? Yeah, there is a lot of testing items here. I don't want to go into the weed of testing yet because we have some other more important things to do, like the consensus API and the execution layer specs. Yeah, there is testnets, and also there is the R&D section. So not all R&D questions are answered. As for today, we have some kind of analysis to do with the transition process. And yeah, we need to do the threat analysis, the attacks and attacks near the point of merge, and attack vector, and analyze new attack vectors that can appear after the merge, like this resource exhaustion attacks. There is the execution layer proof of custody here. It's listed here, but it's not likely to be a part of the minimal merge. Yeah, it's here because of its importance and the willingness to introduce it later on, because it may affect some decisions made on the spawning the services, like the execution layer service. And yeah, that's why here. So we need to figure out discovery. Not sure if it's anything major to do on that side. So, and yeah, the state sync, historic state sync, and sync during transition period is also a tricky one. So that's all actually for the list. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. It feels like at a very high level, the next step is probably for the different client teams to start looking at this and, I guess, you know, going over each of those checkboxes and trying to figure out what actually needs to be done. Yeah, and obviously, you know, we still have like some stuff to finish with London, but I think as that dies down, we'll kind of naturally transition there. And yeah, Peter, you have your hand up.
Yep. So I don't know whether we should be commenting on this stuff now or not.
Sure. Yeah.
But if yes, there's one bullet point which is fairly new in the EVM execution. It was reusing the difficulty field for the rundown values, and I would like to request either rethinking that or I don't know, maybe exploring it a bit more, because the problem is, so the idea behind that point is that since post-merge the difficulty will not be relevant, it can be repurposed to feed the 32-byte rundown. And the reason why this specific field was chosen, because the EVM already has a difficulty opcode, so you could just piggyback on that opcode and access the randomness oracle. And in my opinion, this is not the best idea, because I mean, it doesn't cost us anything to add a new opcode called random, so that I don't think we need to piggyback on existing opcode. The bigger problem that I kind of see is that currently the difficulty is a small number. I mean, the field can be, in Ethereum world, most of the fields can be 256 bits, and the difficulty is insignificantly small compared to that. And essentially, you can just keep adding it up to get to a total difficulty, and every client does it now. Now, if we repurpose the difficulty field to be a random number, then it means that all of a sudden we will use all 32 bits. And in the second block, we will overflow with the total difficulty, the 256 bits. Now, in theory, this is possibly, you can fix clients so that this won't be a problem. But in practice, essentially the notion of total difficulty is really deeply ingrained all over the place. And it just feels like a bit playing with fire to change the base invariant that all of a sudden after the fork, this field can become extremely large. So that's why my suggestion would be to maybe pick the mix hash field and add a new random opcode, unless there's a very strong reason not to do it like that.
So there is another reason that was selected, is that although it's been bemoaned as a terrible practice, difficulty is used almost only in the EVM today for randomness. And so that was another consideration on that decision. I'm happy to rethink this decision. I'm not married to that. I would worry, we need to select something for that value to return. Putting 1 in there or something might actually be dangerous because it could hide fork choice bugs, because then you end up with like some weird longest chain rule that maybe works some of the time. And so we would need to be careful. Like if we're worried that total difficulty is going to haunt us, we need to make sure that it doesn't accidentally give you the correct value some of the time and trigger potential like accidental fork choice bugs. So maybe 0 is a more appropriate value. But again, I'm not married to replacing it, but there is another consideration, which is that if you do start putting in 0 or 1, it's going to break some applications that are using the bad randomness today.
Yeah, just a quick reaction to that. So I'm fine with going into this direction. My request is that we should investigate it and make sure we cover all the side effects.
Yeah, agreed. And maybe we should do a deeper investigation of how clients are and will be using it in the future before we make like a firm decision here.
Thanks. I see Mikhail and Axik, you both have your hands up. I'm not sure who was first.
Axik was first.
Cool.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, for what it's worth, in Solidity, the difficulty field is considered a 256-bit number. So it won't be truncated. Whether that's good or bad, that's a question, but at least whoever is using it within Solidity and not like in inline assembly, they would get the complete value for the difficulty.
Got it. Thanks.
I think that the fact that it's not truncated is good, as expected. I do understand what Peter's consideration, and I have a question. Here we can use the mix hash instead of difficulty field, but then we will have to change the EVM context for the blocks that are produced by the proof of stake chain, and switch and jump between these two EVM contexts between the execution of proof of work and proof of stake blocks. And if this path is less buggy and less controversial, then reusing the difficulty field. So I think we can really go this way.
Yeah, so I guess it has implications in both ways. Yeah, so either way, I don't think there's anything more to discuss except that there's this quirky thing with this idea, and we will obviously find a good enough solution. Just people need to be aware of it, that it's not not a thing that you will just solve in a half an hour coding session.
Right. And yeah, this difficulty thing, this not difficulty, but random thing is gonna be put into an EIP. So it will definitely be discussed with a lot of care.
Cool. Were there any other comments on the list in general? Okay, yeah, and we have a merge call next week, so we can probably dive into more detail in some of those items on that call as well.
I can add something a bit unrelated but touching. So for the past I know a few months, we've been working kind of in the background with super non-big priority on the synchronization stuff too for post-merge. And one of the things we kind of realized is that it is super annoying to implement the thing for ETH65 and below. So ETH66 introduces request reply IDs, which makes things cleaner. And it's just a pain in the ass to implement it both for the new request reply ID models and the old non-request reply ID models. So as promised about last year, October, Geth will be dropping 65 after London ships so that we can focus on this merge work. It's like a heads up thing.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's good to know.
So does that dropping get released in the London fork, or do you mean you're going to do it sometime soon after the London fork?
No. So the whole point was to wait until London is stable, so that until we know we won't do any hot fixes or stuff like that, and we will only drop it then. And this way we can actually maximize the lifespan of 65, because most people will still just run the London fork release and not upgrade.
Got it.
Cool. Any other comments on the list?
I have a kind of question. What would be the best next step for us to do? What is in mind is to write the EIP drafts or the spec drafts and share them and discuss, or should we do anything else before this?
That's my intuition, because also to do the next wave of prototyping, I think we need to more clearly document a lot of the things, even if they're not final. And so at least what I think we need to focus on is specifications and the basis of testing those, so we can continue to talk about them and build more prototypes.
And maybe also, like based on Axel's comments in the chat here, there's, for each of these items on the list, there's been like a bunch of discussions. Maybe, I don't know, adding like some links. I'm not sure if it's like that document is the right place, but like, yeah, how can we get people caught up on like the latest thinking for these different things, right?
Right.
And maybe that's just actually writing the spec that's based on the latest thinking and kind of explain with a good rationale. Yeah, but I think that's just one thing to kind of keep in mind. Like, how do we bring people on the journey, like of, understanding how we got to the decision?
I did add some PRs and links where relevant, but I think we could probably flesh that out and keep adding them as we add things. But yeah, the conversation has been on a lot of those like merge calls and scattered throughout Discord. So writing everything down more and better and more often will be a priority.
Cool. Anything else on the list? So the last thing, so Lightline had a comment about having a higher level discussion around fork scheduling, and others have reached out to me also about that in the past couple weeks, even though we got the block for London 3 days ago. But basically, a few months ago, we kind of agreed to, after London, focus on the merge and potentially have Shanghai, before the merge if we see that the merge is unlikely to happen by December, or have Shanghai after the merge if we see that the merge is likely to happen by December. Yeah, so that's obviously, it's obviously hard to know, I think, today what the odds are of the merge happening by December. And if we want to maximize those odds, we kind of have to start working on the merge and making progress on all these things we just discussed. But I understand doing that obviously puts us in a spot where like we might get to December and not necessarily have time for to implement and test a whole fork with a bunch of different features in it. So that's where I'm at, I guess, with regards to that right now, is I feel like we probably need to see a little bit more, at least, how the work around the merge continues and progresses, before we can determine if we want to have like a proper feature fork and consider stuff like 3540, 3074 and whatnot, and have like those discussions. Yeah, so that's kind of how I feel about things. I don't know if others have thoughts or questions they wanted answered.
Well, my 2 cents is that we cannot focus on 2 completely different things. So if we start doing the work for merge, and then in the meantime, well, maybe we should do Shanghai, shouldn't do Shanghai, then it's just going to be a bit of a weird situation where nothing gets done. So my personal 2 cents would be to get the merge done and focus on features afterwards. And that does not mean that we would get the merge done by December.
Yeah. And I guess the worst case scenario, if that happens, is we basically have Muir Glacier Part 2 in December, right? We can always just have a single fork that just pushes back the difficulty bomb, by however much longer we think we need.
I think I was also curious, like even higher level than like specifically things like Shanghai and the merge, but how, as like core developers, do people feel about scheduling forks? Like I'm pretty lucky that I'm not the person who has to maintain the fork or maintain a client and prepare for a fork, but it feels like, if I was a core developer who did have to do that, I basically have to just assume, 3 or 4 months ago, we thought maybe we would ship 1559 in beginning of July, and now it's the beginning of August. And so that's a lot of uncertainty for core developers. And I'm curious if there is any desire to have, more fixed fork schedule.
I think there were a few attempts to do fixed schedules, and it always blew up really nastily. And we always kind of just fallen back to the it's ready when it's done, or it's released when it's ready state.
Is that something that you feel is going to be sustainable long term, or is that something that you think is just how it is right now, but it's not really ideal?
I mean, so the fact that you say if to merge will be done by December doesn't mean that it will be done. So the question is, you reach December and it's not done, what do you do?
Yeah, I think the merge is kind of a special thing because continuing on a proof of work chain, we're spending lots of money for security. And so it's kind of, let's do the merge as fast as we can. But beyond that, once we go back to regularly scheduled feature forks, like is, just doing things when they're ready, like a sustainable pattern for people? Or do you think that there's going to be desire?
Maybe one different way to frame that question is, what's like the target amount of forks roughly we want to have per year? And I kind of feel like the difficulty bomb helped in a bit for London in that way, that like it helped like reduce the scope and kind of keep us focused on on shipping like the smallest set of things that would matter. And you know, Peter, you had like this this comment in All Core Devs earlier this week that if there's 3 forks a year on average, you're out. And I think historically we've been, you know, kind of like between 0 and 2. But I think knowing that, like knowing what's the amount we aim for, can help be a sort of loose constraint there, where if we're saying we want to do 1 or 2 forks per year, for example, then that kind of gives you your cadence, right? It's like 6 months. And then you, even though, you know, maybe you're not ready on exactly the 6 months deadline, you know that like 3-ish months in, you can't accept any more EIPs, and things just need to be kicked out in the next one. So yeah, maybe it's like aiming for a loose number of upgrades per year. Yeah. Yo, Peter, you have your hands up.
Yeah, so the problem with hard forks is that implementing a hard fork is an insignificant amount of time compared to maintaining a client, at least in the Geth team. So we're always very deep in some weird refactors or optimizations or experiments or whatnots. And the hard forks are just, so every time we figure that, okay, now London is coming up, then everything needs to be put on hold, or even if not on hold, kind of like, okay, let's implement this. Okay, now test that. Okay, it fell apart. We changed it, we tweaked it a bit. So it just puts everything else on hold. And you kind of need the time in between the hard forks where people can actually focus on getting their clients better and not just upgrading the consensus rules. For example, if TurboGeth or Aragon, they figured out that they're going to do a different data model, which looked very promising, and they needed 5 years to do it. Now, if Aragon were to have, so if they were a mainnet client that actually were alive on mainnet, then it would mean that during those 5 years, they would have had to implement and constantly tweak their own new model to this old hard forks, and they would be nowhere with their new model. So it's if you just go hard fork, I mean, it's perfectly fine as long as clients only work on the hard forks and nothing else. But if you want clients to actually optimize and work on other stuff, then you can't push people too much. And here the problem is that it's super hard to say. I mean, you also can't really tell a client, okay, now you have 2 months to work on your crap, and then we're back to working on hard fork, because certain projects take more than 2 months.
Oh,
yeah,
I'm just curious if other core developers have thoughts on like how to deal with the next, 18 to 36 months on Ethereum, because there are a lot of really significant changes that are, theoretically in the works, things like address space extension, changing the state trie. Like, how can we balance this in a way that clients can continue to do their normal maintenance and improvements, but also support these larger scale changes?
Just a tongue-in-cheek comment. Changing the address space and changing the trie, both will not happen in the next 2 years. I can guarantee that.
Did you say the next 2 or the next 3 years?
Yeah, I said 2. I was a bit more optimistic.
Okay, yeah. 2 I can see. 3 I would be really surprised.
Thomas?
Yeah, I think obviously London fork was very demanding in the amount of work around the transactions. So maybe some better road mapping and clear barriers, like this fending off the EIPs and different ideas and people trying to push them just to happen in this coming fork was very tiring and distracting. So we could have the conversations, and there was lots of conversations on the sides when we were discussing bigger changes, the research, bigger EIPs. But the moment when they were changing into, oh, so maybe let's have them in London, that was very tiring and distracting, because suddenly it was a bit harder to plan the fork that was just like a 1 or 2 months away. And I was happy to pick the bigger fights for the next forks and start having this conversation about next forks with people, and then we'll be less pushy for any big changes that were proposed. And then long-term planning for a year, 1.5 for the client development is also more reasonable. But we've seen that over and over again, that we have some changes being dropped like 1, 2, 3 weeks before the forks hitting the test nets, and people thinking that this is okay because this is so normal.
Yeah, that's pretty useful. Yeah, Ansgar, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly say that also, like, as one of the kind of EFP authors of 3074, which was, I think, like a good case study here, just in the sense that I think if there was kind of clarity that, say, for example, we have 2 feature forks every year, right, or like 2 forks in general, and so basically, and they're 6 months spaced out, then I feel like there would be no like kind of like, it would be very easy to say, yeah, the ERP isn't ready yet, there are security concerns, let's just kind of like take a step back, address them, whatever, right? And then we know, okay, the next fork, is it realistic to target this one, or we target the next one, or whatever. I feel like a lot of kind of these problems with ERPs really being pushed hard and whatever also comes from this uncertainty, where people always have the fear that if they don't make a specific fork, it's completely unclear how long they have to wait, right? And so kind of like this predictability around forks would also greatly help, I think, reduce the amount of kind of pressure people feel to try and get their EIP into the specific next fork, because otherwise it might be lost forever or something. Or, I mean, of course, I'm being a bit kind of hyperbolic here, but I mean, I think the point generally stands. And also, I feel like, relatedly, things like the approach with the YOLO networks of basically trying to have more liberal test nets where you can just experiment with additional changes, and it just like, so basically we have these latent test nets where once a fork, we have a cutoff, like say 3 months before fork, and then we basically just look at the test nets and take all the uncontroversial ERPs that have been fully agreed upon and that also have been fully implemented and tested already, and just pick them, and like then we don't have to discuss much and so on. So I feel like this kind of general approach makes a lot of sense to me.
Marius?
Yeah, I think that's like the biggest problem I see is testing. It's not really implementing the changes, but basically the testing team can start testing or like start real testing of the implementations after everyone has implemented their changes. And of course, because like different client teams have different people working on it and like different amounts of funding and stuff. Some teams are faster implementing a change, some teams are slower, and so it's like basically the testing teams can only start working after everyone else is done, and then I think we need at least 3 months of fuzzing tests, like state tests, test networks, to really be like at least reasonable sure that this doesn't break on mainnet. So I would be totally against like having a like a more stringent schedule. I think it might make sense to have 2 forks per year, like to see that we can schedule 2 forks per year. But more than that, I think it's really heavy on the client teams. And I myself been pretty burnt out the last couple of weeks due to London, and so I think some of the other guys feel the same way. That's just my 2 cents.
it feels like we need a much longer term vision on things. Like I think like 3074 is a good example of something that shouldn't even have been allowed to be discussed. It should have kind of been shut down in March. Like I understand why we started discussing it, because it seemed like a potentially good change that may have gotten rolled behind the merge, and it may still get rolled behind the merge or never ship. But because of how soon London was, I think we should, maybe do a better job of saying, getting the fork scheduled far in advance, having an idea of what's going into it far in advance, not even allowing discussions of changing the schedule, 6 months away from a fork. Maybe this is just like a naive opinion.
No,
I don't know.
So I strongly agree with the more long-term planning, and it's something I've been trying to think about how we can do. And I think, there's a lot of like legacy in the format of like how we run all core devs that tends to bias towards more shorter term planning. The one challenge with like, I feel like we could probably plan 1-ish year out, not too poorly. But after that, it gets very hard because of like kind of the speculative nature of some stuff. So like, for example, Ansgar mentioned address space extension versus like the vertical try migration, right? And we could say we're going to do the vertical try stuff and then address space extension. And 6 months from now, there's been no progress on vertical tries and address space extension is kind of coming along. And I know that when I was planning EIP 1559, for example, I thought in March 2020 that we would get it done by the end of 2020, and that early or mid 2021, which is now, we would like have stateless live, and I really wanted to have that done before stateless. And like, obviously the path around state expiries changed a ton. EIP 1559 to like 3 times as long. So it's just like I guess the uncertainty when you do longer term planning gets much higher. And if you have a bunch of different initiatives, it's hard to stack them. And the other challenge is then it gets much easier to plan kind of the smaller stuff than the bigger stuff. So for example, 3074 is much easier to plan for than like address space extension, even if say, address space extension was the thing we wanted to prioritize over 3074. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I've said, there are like a couple challenges to doing it, but I agree we probably need to move in that direction. And this will get even more complicated after the merge, because not only do we have to coordinate amongst the execution client teams, but we're going to have the whole consensus layer on top as well.
That's actually an interesting question. For post-merge worlds, how much work is needed by the various teams for upgrades? Do we have to upgrade both clients each time, or is there possible to upgrade one without the other?
I think Mikael would have the best answer there.
From the changes that are related to the network, I don't think it will need to be. It will require an upgrade of both clients each time. So, for example, if Beacon Chain client, Beacon Chain has a hard fork, has an upgrade, it will not require execution clients to get updated too. But if we see something like coupling the consensus and execution clients in terms of setup, in terms of configuration, you're setting up only, let me say, GAF, and it downloads the consensus client that is specified by the user or by default, then it will probably, in this, if they're kind of bundled, then it will probably require the execution clients to get updated too. But that's just my thoughts. And this is not I'm not sure it will be the case how the configuration will work.
What about the other way around? When we want to do a feature change, let's say add an opcode to the EVM, will that require a Beacon Chain upgrade as well, or Beacon client upgrade, consensus client upgrade?
If this is just pure EVM upgrade, which
Yeah,
does not
hypothetically.
require. Yeah. So it doesn't require any information from the consensus layer, like we can block routes or
So
yeah,
there
this
are
kind of things.
There does exist, it sounds like, a set of features that would require only execution client updates, and a set of features that would only require consensus client updates, and then there will probably also be a set of features that require both to update in tandem. And it's only for that third set that we really have to worry about dealing with the complexity of simultaneous updates and coordination.
And that will probably hit us right after the merge, because people will want to withdraw their Ether from the beacon chain back into the execution layer. So I suspect we'll get
certainly
to test drive that pretty quickly. Yeah, I don't know if anyone has any more comments on this. I feel like I definitely need to digest this conversation and think about it more. But yeah, if anyone has more thoughts, now's the time to share them.
I'm sure I have more thoughts, but I was supposed to call, so I'm not going to say anything.
Cool. Thomas?
Yeah, I would like to keep insisting on naming the next fork always. Like, so when we have conversation about London, the more time we mention the name Shanghai, the more likely it will be that people will start feeling like this is a real thing that happens next, and then they can plan a bit more. So it's just simply naming it and having it in conversations would possibly already allow us in the previous weeks to move some of the IP's proposals to be in the next fork. However strange it feels, I think that simply giving it a name and the rough date is enough.
Fair enough.
Well, for those specific...
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh, I guess Alex and Ansgar, you can comment.
I have a separate question, so if Ansgar, you have a comment for this, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to very briefly mention because we were talking about Shanghai specifically as an example. I think it's in some sense also shows though that like what the problem with this is, right? Because I distinctly remember when we talked about what to include in London, like 3 months ago or something. Basically, I think I was in the position there. I said that it's unclear if we'll have something else in between London and the merge, and people were saying, no, yeah, we will have Shanghai. It will be in November or December, and maybe that will be the merge. Then there was this whole the merge is Shanghai meme, or if we don't have the merge kind of ready by then, we'll do a feature fork instead. And now it looks like even if the merge happens, say, I don't know, Q1 next year, we'll like basically have the merge first and then Shanghai afterwards. So kind of like there's a danger in kind of talking about later out forks too soon, because this is like a prime example where this information kind of like ended up not being reliable, right? So kind of like being too concrete about plans when we end up not doing them.
There will be a Shanghai in November because the difficulty bomb goes off in December. So we have to do something. Like there will be a patch that will go out in November, and we can call it Shanghai.
It's a big difference whether that's like Muir Glacier Part 2 or whether that includes, say, EIP 3540 and 3074, right?
Oh, I would. So I agree with Thomas. We should call that Shanghai no matter what's in it. Like we should stick to Shanghai is the thing that happens after London. The next thing after London is the thing that happens in November. We don't know what that's going to include yet, but that will be Shanghai.
Yes, but I think from the perspective of EIP champions, you know, if you tell them you might be in Shanghai, but realistically nobody actually thinks we're going to do feature work aside from the merge, then yeah, it's just quite like it doesn't really solve their problem, right? They know something will happen, but it doesn't give them a feeling about whether it's likely that they can be included in that. Yeah.
So at the moment we have two options: either tell people it may go to Shanghai or tell them it won't go to Shanghai. I would really like to be able to tell people, oh yeah, it seems like something that should go in Shanghai, or I think this is very reasonable for Cancun, and give them the rough dates of November and May. That's it.
Got it. Alex, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, this might be a dumb question, but regarding the merge, is any of those sides, so like the execution side, does it know about what epoch are we in, versus does the consensus side know what block number are we in? And I'm asking this whether there's like any consensus level coordination, what like hard fork should be active, or whether all the node operators just have to know what versions of both of the clients they have to run.
Consensus layer is aware of the block number that is on the execution chain, because currently there is a link, and there is a link between those two. And yeah, actually Beacon Chain clients uses Mainnet clients to grab if1 data from it and put it on the voting to onboard new validators and process deposits. But the epoch, whether the execution side is aware of the epoch or a slot, it depends on what will be implemented. It depends on the consensus API. Obviously, we will need a slot for some opcodes like Beacon block root in the future. And we will probably need epoch to signify the network upgrades after the merge. So yeah, it's not like aware of epochs now, but it can be. It's up to us.
So would it does it mean that the consensus side, so the Beacon Chain side, when it asks the execution layer to the RPC method, it would check what block number it is in, and it would just reject building a block if it's just too old or something. So all the ensuring that everything is in sync with the latest hard fork requirements, is that then just driven from the Beacon chain side?
Yeah, that's a good question. Are you referring to the hard forks after the merge or to the merge hard fork itself?
No, it's more a general question. After we are in this merged state, how do we? I mean, just a question which was asked. What happens when one side needs to be updated? What happens when both sides needs to be updated? And just in general, how will node operators know that both of their clients are properly updated, and just need them to maintain this independently seems to be prone to issues.
Right, I've been thinking about for a little bit about hard forks after the merge, and I've been thinking about a single point of hard fork coordination, whether it's the pure consensus chain upgrade or the execution or both. So it will likely be the epochs of the Beacon chain, which makes a lot of sense. And the execution client codes will need to be adjusted to be able to enable new logic based on these epochs propagated down from the consensus layer. But this is just like the basic thoughts on it. Does it answer your question?
Yeah, that this needs to be discussed, I guess.
Definitely.
Yeah, maybe if there's no specific point for this in the merge roadmap document, then maybe this would be an interesting one to be added.
Yeah, that's a good point. Cool. On that note, we're basically at time. Do people have any final thoughts, questions, comments in the last minute?
We're going to hang out in the lounge channel on the ETH R&D Discord if anyone wants to continue chatting about things.
Usually not useful chatter.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks everybody. And yeah, see some of you in the Discord and everybody else in 2 weeks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.